Okay, we are live. Thursday, 1 p.m. Brazil time. It's seminar slot in computer engineering. And I'm more than happy today of having Christian's presentation. Christian is a long time mate. It has been a very long time ago that we first met and interacted in the networking domain. You can find more about the biography and his past in our networking field, Ericsson, Cisco, big companies. And I'm very happy, Christian, to have you today because you are going to bring another layer to our seminars, which is a very important one, the business perspective of uh, of, um, uh, of our domains, how these business models shift, and of course they are grounded in technology, but uh, it's very interesting that you bring this other perspective today. The other topic that we were commenting is that yesterday it was the Teachers' Day or Professors' Day worldwide. And Christian, I'm going to convince you to come also to our community. So hopefully we'll have you also as a teacher in the future. And I'm looking forward to learn with your talk. I will stop screen sharing right now, and then you can take over.
Yes, thank you, Christian. I actually remember my first talk that I gave at Unicamp. That was a while ago, and it was still in the networking domain. So I was very technical at the time. It was a very nice campus. I still remember that. So,
Yeah.
it was in person, face to face.
Yes.
Yeah, so still different times. But I'm really glad to be back and to be presenting again at Unicamp remotely this time. Yeah. Okay, so let me share my screen as well. Here you go. I think that should be taken care of this. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah. So Christian has already alluded to it. So we will take a little bit of a business perspective this time, but still very at the intersection essentially of business and technology. Um, the idea for the talk essentially came thinking that every day when I look into the news, I see companies going through change. It's always the same. In some cases, these are companies that are anticipating change, responding to it proactively, seeing opportunities that others don't see, and they're trying to seize those opportunities ahead of everyone else. An example that comes to mind is perhaps Meta, with the smart glasses that they are working on. And then oftentimes it's also companies that have fallen behind a little bit and reacting, so those are companies that may not have seen a change or may not have anticipated that it would be as transformative as it turned out to be. So you really have both sides, but what is consistent is that there's always change. It's affecting every company, it's affecting every sector, and every now and then a whole sector goes through a transformation. And this is what we want to talk a little bit about today, based on the example of the automotive industry, and then specifically on how Tesla, as one of the newer players in this industry, is driving much of this change. But we'll look at the auto industry end to end, so essentially also how it has evolved over the decades, because the transformation that it is currently going through is by far not the only one. The automotive industry has gone through a lot of transformations. I can tell you that already. I would love to, and Christian and I spoke about this a little bit, experiment a little bit with making this interactive. So if it doesn't work out the way we'll give it a try. Every now and then I'll open it up for discussion, and then we will see in those cases, and in general, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question or add a comment. I think that would be great. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump right in. I would like to first, before we get into the auto industry, zoom out a little bit and just look at the economy in general. So what you see here is a chart that depicts the longevity of companies on the S&P 500 as a function of time. The S&P 500, of course, is an index of the 500 most valuable publicly traded US companies. It is worth around $56 trillion at this point. Even though it is only the top 500 companies, it accounts for around 80% of the market capitalization. So it's usually used as a good proxy for just the economy, the US economy overall. And innovation professionals like to look at this chart because they believe that it shows a lot about, it is a good measure for change that is affecting the industry. Right? So longevity, essentially, it's not the age of the companies on the S&P 500, it is how long they have been on the index. And because it is the 500 most valuable ones, you can imagine every now and then some companies are kicked out of the index, others fill their slots, and that happens every quarter. So every quarter there is what they call a turnover. You know, some companies joining, some companies leaving, and then the reciprocal of turnover is essentially the average longevity of the companies on the S&P 500. So, and if you look at this, ignore the red part for a moment, because that, at the time the chart was created, was a projection, and things have changed. We'll get to that in a minute. But if you look at the gray part, like what stands out? What do you see? Kind of any trends that are remarkable? Feel free to unmute yourself or send a question in, and Christian is going to read it aloud. Daniel, maybe? Okay. Well, one thing is that there's constant up and down, right? This is probably one thing that is worth pointing out. There's not like one trend. It's like these waves, you know. And then the other trend, the waves don't go back to the same point. They always end at a lower spot, you know. So there's also this longer term trend that is actually going down. Longevity overall seems to be going down. And if you think of these phenomena, like what might be driving this? Any ideas? Well, speaking of technology,
too heavy competition, Christian?
Yes, and maybe yes, that is correct. And specifically, oftentimes are also competition of new players, right? Or players that have adopted something new that others haven't yet adopted. So that is exactly right. So let me switch to the next slide here. It's essentially like whenever you have an innovation that is affecting all the players in the market, and a transformative new innovation, then we will see one of these waves, you know. So it started in the early 1960s, for example, when we had the semiconductor was invented. It was Texas Instrument was one of the early companies, Fairchild Semiconductors. These companies spearheaded the transistor and the integrated circuit, and with you know these modules, you know, you could build products in an entirely different way. Previously, it used to be the vacuum tubes, you know, very brittle technology that used a lot of drew a lot of energy, generated a lot of heat. It broke all the time, needed to be replaced. The transistor didn't have any of these problems, and so it was a big change for first mainframe computers, later mini computers, right? So it affected IBM, for example, at the time, big time. And later, during the 1960s, when prices came down, these transistors also started to be used for consumer electronics, right? So think of the calculator at the time, the transistor radio, television, etc., etc. So a lot of change at the time. Some companies picked up these new technologies, others fell behind, and so you had some turnover, right? The semiconductor then, of course, also enabled the next innovation, the personal computer, right? Which essentially started right when you had the next wave. So 1977, for example, or I think it was 1976 at the Apple I, 1977 the Apple II. The IBM PC came shortly afterwards, 1981. Right? Commodore 64, very popular gaming computer at the time. Not sure if you remember. In 1982, it all happened at around this time. And then the internet. The internet in the mid 1990s to 2000, essentially. Clearly, a lot of companies have seen their business model change because of the internet. So and then I mentioned that, ignore the red part for a moment, because at the time this chart was generated in 2021, it was a forecast at the time, and artificial intelligence was really not a big thing at the time, when they generated this forecast. So it's very possible that the curve that we are seeing here, and someone should run the numbers actually, it looks entirely different. And maybe we have just another wave because artificial intelligence is now one of these innovations, right? Okay, so innovations seem to be bringing longevity down. What do you think might be bringing it up? So because at every wave, eventually it goes back up. Any ideas? That is not so straightforward. And no one can prove that there's but there's definitely a timing coincidence. Well, there were crises. In 1973, the oil crisis. The Organization of Arab Oil Exporting Countries, petroleum exporting countries, decided to put an embargo on oil for certain countries, including the United States, because they felt these countries had been too supportive of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. So that led to a crisis. There was the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, 1990. Of course, in the 2000s, we had the dot-com crash, the internet bubble that burst at the time. And you had a crisis at each of these moments, and then actually we see the longevity go back up. And one possible explanation for this is just simply that when you're going through these crises, people are taking perhaps fewer risks. Maybe it's the large incumbent companies that, because they sit on their cash reserves, have a little bit more stamina to weather these crises. This is just an attempt to explain this, but clearly, time-wise, a correlation. Okay, so those are specific innovations. Now, if we translate this to specific industries, think of the innovations we have in front of us here, but also other types of innovation, that have affected or have led to a transformation of entire industries. Are there any that come to mind? Well, the title gives away one, the automotive industry. Of course, there's electrification, and we'll get to that, a lot of other transformations in the past. But then some other industries, maybe. I see Eduardo has put on the video. I'm not sure if that means you want to speak up.
Yeah, Christian, but I was not trying to bother you, to disturb you in this. I was just thinking to myself about this trend of the declination in the boundary of the great to the ready regarding about the COVID is as an international crisis too.
Yes.
And just wanted to listen to you if there's something, of course, related
Yes.
to COVID, or if I'm wrong.
That is a good question, and I don't know the answer to this because I don't know. As I mentioned, I have not run the numbers, and now I'm actually curious, and I think I should do it, or someone else does it. Very good point. Yes. So we actually have like two things affecting these years that were not necessarily known at the time the forecast was made. You had actually had a crisis. There was the COVID crisis, and then there's also an innovation, which is the AI. So both are affecting those years. It actually would be very interesting to have a closer look at what happened to longevity. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. So some other industries, just for example, if you think of the internet, it has changed so many things. Journalism is an example where newspapers used to be printed on paper. No one, or most people I should say, don't read news on paper anymore. It's the internet, of course. Entertainment, right? I'm actually just going to go to the next slide where I have like summarized a few of them. Entertainment, used to be cable television. It still exists, but people are canceling it on droves, switching to Netflix. And more recently, YouTube and TikTok are taking an increasing share of people's time. That's everyone has only 24 hours a day, and more time is being spent on those platforms. So it's like going through change. Entertainment is going through change again. Healthcare, digital technologies are enabling what they call for example, what they call point of care therapies and diagnostics, where essentially, parts of a therapy can be done at the bedside. Some diagnostic tests can now be done at the bedside. The patient doesn't necessarily have to go to a central lab, or specimen don't necessarily have to be sent to a central lab. Spoke about journalism. Let me just look at my own list here. Retail, of course, right? E-commerce has changed retail tremendously. The majority of goods sold, or the value that is being sold, retail value that is being sold, is still brick and mortar. Interestingly, I think 16% or so is e-commerce. But even the brick and mortar retailers these days, everyone has an omni-channel strategy, right? So that has been a change as well. And then energy, of course, the shift to renewables, that's clear as well. Okay, so I already highlighted automotive because it's the topic of the discussion today. And why is that the topic of discussion today? It's very interesting in terms of the transformations that the industry has gone through over time, over the decades. And I want to start, before we get to Tesla as a case study, I want to start by just reviewing 3 of those transformations that the auto industry has gone through. So let me start with this one here. The picture that you see here, is the Ford River Rouge plant at the beginning of the 20th century. So that was a plant in Dearborn, Michigan. So it's a suburb essentially of Detroit. And what Henry Ford himself at the time essentially did here was to build a fully vertically integrated automotive plant. Literally, like on one end of the plant, raw materials came in, and on the other end of the plant, finished vehicles came out. It was fully vertically integrated. They made their own steel on the plant because Henry Ford thought that the sheet steel that he could buy on the market was both too expensive and too low quality. He made his own glass on his plant, actually with a new continuous process to increase quality and then again reduce cost. He made his own tires and tubes on his plant, engines and transmissions and radiators. There was an electricity plant right there. Made their own plastic, even a paper mill. Literally everything was made right there. Right? And of course, that has changed entirely. Starting in the mid of the century, automakers increasingly outsourced to suppliers. And today you have something that some people call essentially catalog engineering. You know, whenever the automakers build a new vehicle or a new model, they essentially look through the catalog of what they can get from the supplier, and then the rest is assembling this, putting it together. Of course, it's not that black and white, but the shift has been tremendous. Why, by the way, did Henry Ford need to do that? Any ideas? Like, of course, part of this was, part of fully vertically integrating was that he wanted to reduce cost and increase quality. We've mentioned that a few times. But there was one more thing. What did Henry Ford invent? The assembly line. And on an assembly line, vehicles come out in a short every so many minutes. And so you don't want to wait on your suppliers to give you the supplies. The supplies need to be ready as well. And since many of the suppliers were actually less automated than Henry Ford was, he figured that is more reliable actually to do it himself, right? So lower costs, higher quality, and then also less supply chain risk. Of course, over time, suppliers also automated, you know, that was less of an issue over time. And so that enabled a trend towards more outsourcing, which we have seen starting in the mid-century. The numbers that you see here, by the way, are a little bit pulled together from different sources. They're a little hard to get. Many automakers don't necessarily publish this, but some do. And so I have like two examples here, Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen. It's tremendous. The supply chain is gigantic. You know, Mercedes-Benz, case in point, 4,000 direct suppliers all across the globe. You have this pyramid of suppliers. You have 8 levels, up to 20 sub-suppliers per level for a given component. It's incredible. Right? Okay, so that was transformation number 1. As you can imagine, like huge transformation from fully vertically integrated to almost the opposite. The next one, also quite interesting, is the share of electronics as a percentage of total car cost and how it has developed over time. In the 1970s, electronics were just a tiny little portion of the cost of a car, 5%. Right? And we are at a point where it's like somewhere between 40 and 50%. And so would love to have the current number as well, because obviously software is now driving a lot of this as well. Autonomy, most recently. So the share of the traditional mechanics, you know, is increasingly coming down. And that, of course, is like driven by consumer preferences, right? So they want their cars to be connected. They want digital features in infotainment, and then safety features, right? So traffic is, streets are increasingly congested. So it is good to have extra safety features in your car, right? Okay, and the third transformation I want to highlight is, surprise, surprise, of course, the shift to electric, you know. And we actually see, the interesting part here is that we actually seem to be at an inflection point at the moment. So, you know, these numbers are from 2024, fairly recent. The share of new cars sold that were electric across the world on average is like at 1/5 of all cars are electric. So it seems to be that we are at an inflection point. That's a good thing. The thing that is maybe not so good is that this is very unevenly distributed across the globe. Right? In Norway, 9 out of 10 cars that are sold are electric. and then in India it's almost none. Right? In the United States, it was just 1 out of 10. It's very unevenly distributed. Okay, so 3 big transformations that affected the auto industry at large, affected essentially every automaker similarly, and the response of automakers was also similar. But you had also a certain automakers that have done things differently. One example, and I was on the fence of maybe taking that example. One example was actually Toyota when they came out with the Prius. That was a thing that, that was unique to Tesla. The anticipation of increasing oil prices, the anticipation of climate change, and then the conclusion that such a hybrid vehicle would be a good solution. That was something that was unique to Toyota at the time when they brought it out, and when they brought the Prius to market, and it became a huge success, as you can imagine. But Tesla has also been driving a lot of change. They've done a lot of things differently. Interestingly enough, many of these things actually touch upon the 3 transformations we just discussed, even though those transformations have been decades ago, except for the last one, the electricity one, of course, which is ongoing, clearly. Can you imagine, and some of you may know this, what are some of the things that Tesla is doing differently? Just, some of you might even be driving a Tesla, but you may have just been following the news as well. So let's start by just the last trend, which is electrification. Clearly, Tesla has been kicking this off, like initiating this, or has been instrumental, I should say, in kicking off this new trend to electrification. So kudos to Tesla to actually making that happen. But electric vehicles have existed before. Car companies have tried many times to bring those to market. And actually at some point, very early on, at the beginning of the 20th century, they were actually hugely popular. 1 of every 3 cars on American roads at the time was electric. And the wife of Henry Ford, Clara Ford, she has even said that she thought that was the superior technology because no pollution, quiet. This is the same discussion that we have today, but also the same disadvantages that we have today. So range was a problem, cost was a problem. These cars have always been a compromise, essentially, in terms of speed, in terms of range. And so people didn't necessarily want to buy them. And when Henry Ford then decided to go for gasoline cars with his assembly line, and the assembly line brought down the cost of cars tremendously, that essentially caused the shift to gasoline cars. Right? And Tesla reinvented the electric vehicle, so to say. And what they did different than the other attempts before the priority was to make those cars attractive. There was not going to be a compromise, a car that was going to be a compromise in terms of speed, in terms of range. No, it was supposed to be a desirable, attractive car. And so when they brought out the first car, the Roadster, it actually had a mileage of over 200 miles on a charge. And the acceleration was amazing. And it was a sports car, everyone wanted one. So that was the strategy. Very different thought process around like how to bring such a car to market. The other thing is we spoke about electronics, and we briefly touched upon software as well. Software is, of course, another thing that Tesla has done differently. Like, anyone want to chime in? Tesla's approach to software? Well, unlike other car makers, fully vertically integrated, all in-house, right? And it's to much extent the software that's the differentiator, right? Based on the observation, people actually like these digital features, and the differentiation comes in the software. The software, in turn, can be updated over the years, right? Remember that when Tesla picked up, people already had, the smartphone had come, the iPhone had come out a few years earlier. So people had gotten used to compelling digital features on the go and to over-the-air updates. So if my iPhone can update over the air, why should my car not update over the air, right? The value proposition is compelling. You buy a car and it gets better over time with every update, right? And if the differentiation is in the software, then maybe you have to pay less attention on the hardware. Maybe you only need 4 models or 5 or how many they have right now. Maybe these models don't need to be upgraded every year. Maybe a model like the Model 3 doesn't need all sorts of gadgets into it, can be a bit more simplistic internally if the value actually comes from the software, right? And that brings down the cost of the car as well. And then the last thing, and I won't ask because that is some, or maybe some of you also know it. When it comes to vertically integration, we saw the trend from fully vertically integrated to almost the opposite. A lot of outsourcing. How's Tesla doing it? Again, very vertically integrated. And the reason they are doing it also has to do with them being at the forefront of technological innovation, just like Henry Ford was at the time. When you are at such a point and everyone else is essentially behind in terms of your technology, then it's better to vertically integrate because it gives you more control. And that is what Tesla is doing, with essentially they're building their own batteries or portions of it in the gigafactories, software fully in-house. Many of the electronics are built in-house. They even have custom designed machinery for their factories, right? Such as the GigaPress, which builds the underbody in just one part that other automakers did it very differently, many parts that had to be put together. So again, fully vertical, and the charger network, and insurance, and lots of things that are all vertically integrated. So Tesla is almost like back to the approach where Henry Ford was at the time, right? Okay, so again, like a company that is really like questioning every part of the business model and trying to see if there's maybe a better way to do it. I've not mentioned one key element of the business model that Tesla also changed. Anyone can guess what it is? Here's my summary, and it's kind of right in the middle, or a little bit. It's the sales part, right? Traditionally, cars have been sold through dealerships. Dealerships sell the cars. They take care of servicing, repairs. Tesla is selling them directly to customers. And why is that? Couple of reasons for this. There's of course a margin advantage, clear. There's also control over the customer experience and direct access to customer feedback, of course. But perhaps most critically, if you look at where does the gross profit of a car dealer come from, roughly speaking, a quarter comes from new car sales, a quarter from used car sales, and the remaining half comes from services and parts. And it just happens to that electric vehicles need less servicing, So there is an incentive for traditional car dealers to sell you in a gasoline car because they know that they will be able to generate more profits out of servicing this car in post sales. Right? And because that is not necessarily like a good fit with electric vehicles, well, Tesla decided to sell cars directly, right, to eliminate that problem. Okay, so lots of aspects of the business model that Tesla has changed. And if I look now at the stock market, so we spoke about the S&P 500, then, you know, can't make any predictions here, but it is looking like Tesla's share price has done quite a bit better over the years than some of the other automakers, right? And if the screenshot here is a little dated. If you look at it right now, it's even more expressive. You know, the share price of Tesla has dipped a little bit since April, but at this point, it seems that it has actually come back up to where the peak used to be. Okay, I will leave you with one quote, and this is from an ancient Greek called Heraclitus. It's a very short quote. You know, it says, "Everything flows." And what he meant by this, and that was his philosophy, and he's said it many times, also in different ways, that change is essentially ubiquitous. Right. So essentially, you also said you can't step into the same river twice, right? Because the river has changed. That was essentially his mantra. And I think it is a very fitting quote also to what we have seen in the automotive industry and, you know, thinking about innovation also in other industries. Okay, I'll leave it with that. And I think, Christian, we want to open it up for comments and questions.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Great.
Thank you for the applause.
Thank you. Let me screen share here. I was going through our students' homework. I'm very happy with this class. The students are getting better and better. I sense, I smell there is some chat GPT also that they are using, or some AI. You didn't touch about AI so much as I would expect. Maybe I can start with this one while I open the responses of our students. How much AI do you think will play a role in this evolving business models of Tesla? How much is it actually playing these days? How would you rate it, and how much do you expect that it will keep impacting? What would you highlight from AI and your
Yeah, so AI and autonomous is one of the elements that we actually haven't touched upon, and it is part of the business model of Tesla, of course, as well. And the interesting part here is the approach, again, that Tesla is taking versus other companies like as Waymo. You know, as you may have seen in the news, Tesla is not using LiDAR to keep cost in check. And that essentially means that they are only using vision, only using cameras. The idea is that everyone who buys a Tesla should have access to self-driving features. And you can't have LiDAR in a car that you sell to everyone. It would get way too expensive. So it's vision only. And the idea is that given enough data, over time, the system should become as good as a human driver. Why? Well, humans just use their eyes to drive. So why should an autonomous car not be able to do the same? The setup is quite compelling. There's roughly 2.5 million Tesla drivers in the United States. 400,000 of those are subscribed to full self-driving, the self-driving feature. or so-called self-driving features. We all know that, you know, it's not there yet. But what it does do is whenever someone uses the feature, the data that is captured through the cameras is actually sent back to Tesla and used to train the model. So all these 4,000 people on the car using full self this feature are helping to improve the algorithm. So it's a tremendous data advantage. And over time, time will tell, you know, if Elon Musk is right and vision only is a viable approach. But he's a man of first principles, and he says that okay, humans can drive with only their eyes, so a car should do the same. That's like the first principle. You know? And if that holds true, then he's going to have a tremendous cost as well as data advantage.
That's a strong argument. I also read something that they are building a digital twins based on all the video that is being captured by all the cars and putting together. They can recreate right the digital twins of the cities and the environments, and then feed it again into the driving systems. And
he actually has a problem, if you think about it, a problem that is much more intractable than the problem that Waymo is solving. And that's not just because they're not using LiDAR. It's also because, to your point, in his model, since every Tesla driver has access to this feature, self-driving needs to be able to work anywhere. Whereas the Waymo approach is to do it city by city. So they all go into a city when they know they're ready for that city, you know, when they have generated enough data for that city. And that's a much different problem than just selling your cars to anywhere and letting them drive autonomously there, right? Where you don't necessarily have trained the car specifically for that environment.
That's a great question, and I think this is a good segue into one of I was trying to select which could be the first question of our students, but this one is touching your point. So, as you know, countries like Brazil, they have other conditions, and you were pointing to something I didn't know, that they unlock the autonomous per city as soon as they feel comfortable. And here the question of the student goes into this: how long do you think it will take for electrical vehicles to become more common and accessible in countries like Brazil, I would add?
I wish I knew. I think my guess is just as good as yours. But when you have a system, you know, like the one Tesla has set up, and you get so much data so quickly, then at some point things can change very quickly, you know, because you reach that inflection point very quickly. But when exactly that will happen, I don't know, and I'm not sure if anyone knows, you know.
Right. Yeah. I have in our faculty, I have colleagues like Hudson that are working on the battery landscape, which is very exciting. The battery model, everything that's another dimension. Let me try to
and then maybe back to like when we will see it. Of course, it's also not just a function of the technology; it's also a function of regulation. Right. So when does the regulator allow these cars to be on the road? What is good enough?
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Okay. I really liked, you know, some there were things that resonate to our networking domain. I was drawing the parallels, the disaggregation, software versus hardware, software defined, you know, all this software defined networking stuff that I've been working
the
for
concepts
so many.
Are very similar.
Very similar, but at the same time so different, I would argue, in the terms how the business of this car industry works versus a networking industry. But let's skip this. Let's take this one.
I mean, there's a reason why Elon Musk has referred to these to his Teslas as computers on wheels, you know, and others have referred to it as data centers on wheels.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, so the thinking is, again, if the value proposition really is predominantly in the software, then you can think of a car as essentially an accessory built around the computer.
Yeah. I really loved your comment on updates and it's as a service, like you you don't own the car, but maybe you get updates. Everyone gets excited when the updates from software versions are available, and I think that there is something there for new models of renting the car or the car as a service, and then you can change at the end. It's right, but your experience within the car, the configuration, the settings, the audio, the everything, and it's what makes right your experience. So this student talks brings up the point of this software first strategy and the risks. So what if there is a software fault? What is if there is a software security issue and all Teslas get broken in some sense, or data outage?
But why would that be easier to solve if you had your software developed by someone else?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wouldn't that make it even worse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is why, again, like this goes back to Clayton Christensen and like integration versus modularization. He had a theory around this, but essentially in a nutshell is, if you are at the cutting edge of innovation and you're doing things differently, then it's usually better to integrate, because it gives you more engineering freedom, you know, more flexibility. If you work together with others, there always has to be an interface, then both sides have to adhere to that interface. It's a limiting factor. And you don't have that limiting factor if you just build everything yourself, because you are in charge of that. You can change the interface anytime. Right? And so vertical integration, first of all, gives you just that extra flexibility. Does it make software more brittle? No, I don't necessarily see that.
No, it's like the open source dilemma, right? Like it's open source, more eyes are looking into it. Does it make it an open source software?
Okay, so compared to open source might be might actually mitigate that problem. That is possible. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. A couple of students have put questions on that next steps. Next, like you described it very nicely.
Perhaps, Christian, I'm sorry. Maybe just be like tying that back to what I previously said. Open source, yes, it could have these advantages, but then it would still be more limiting in terms of the design flexibility that you have, right? Maybe I just wanted to add this. It has that same, well, not drawback, but like disadvantage, you know, compared to doing everything yourself. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's still there. Okay, sorry.
No, please. So I've spotted a couple of questions that they want to discuss. What's next? Of course, everyone wants to know what is next. But you described very nicely, and it was catchy to me, that your strategy to be more vertical or horizontal depends on where you are. If you are at the front and leading, or you are a fast follower, this changes the strategy. Uh, so now Tesla has shown one path. Others will try to follow up, will try to approach. Do you think then it's natural that Tesla will change back and adopt something and a different ecosystem, more open to third parties, and others will copy their model? Or regarding the waves that you described, how would you uh,
You think
uh,
you're asking like when will we go back to
yes,
outsourcing?
yes, do you think this would be natural to expect, or no way? Or I know this is impossible questions to have
Yeah, yeah.
but I spotted different students trying to
No, this is a good question. And look, normally I would say that eventually, yes, this will likely happen, that you get to outsource more, because there will be, the rate of change for any given component will essentially at some point plateau out. And then it's just, it's okay to just outsource that to someone who focuses on just that and does a really good job to do this very efficiently and cost effectively.
Mhm.
The reason I'm a little bit hesitant is that we see so much going on right now. There's literally like multiple trends that are happening in parallel, that make it a little hard to predict on when this is going to happen, if it's going to happen in the near future at all. So like the electrification is one of the trends, right? Increasing value of software is another one. Autonomy is yet another. We just spoke about autonomy. And someone had the question out, like, when will that become mainstream? So all of these things are happening in parallel. And all of these essentially mean that any companies that is pursuing these trends will, by definition, be at the forefront of things. And so it will make sense for those companies to vertically integrate more than they would usually do. Right? So that will likely continue for a while before we see like more commoditization and modularization again. That will be my take.
Mhm. Okay, good. Let me try this one. I know you are right on this. German, US. I'm not sure how much you consider yourself now. You are in the middle of US, German. You have grown up in these multicultural things. Do you think that the one in yellow here, German automakers could be struggling with something that the US mindset uh, takes in other ways? What would be your viewpoint on this one? Although this question looks to me like a chat GPT. You know, whenever I see uh, these dashes in the questions I never used myself, I always think with this chat GPT loves these dashes.
Let me see. Considering this, what specific?
Yeah.
So you're talking about the yellow part, right?
Yeah, the yellow one. Would you dare to comment on EU, German versus US type of approaches to the business model, to breaking rules? In my opinion, Tesla is an example of being innovative and questioning the traditional ways of doing business.
Yes.
Of course, it needs to have the muscles, the economies, the wisdom, and everything. But even if that opportunities, I'm sure that in the German offices, some points the same ideas were put into the table. But to make it to the next step, only American approaches do this, to take the risk and afford it. Do you think there are organizational competencies or maybe some organizational or society things that that make it a pivotal thing in this type of movements or a cultural type of things, and or what's your German US perspective to this?
So look, or a significant reason why, one of the reasons why Germany has been quite successful in the automotive industry in the past was essentially not just the four big automakers, not only the four big automakers, but also this, we spoke about the supply chain, this huge collection of oftentimes mid-market, relatively small companies that built like one component really, really well, right? Super high quality and reliably. So, they have built this massive number of mid-market companies that do that. It's essentially an ecosystem that is built to do hardware really, really well. The challenge for Germany is going to be to then also build this competency in software. That is exactly, in the past, that wasn't like the number one priority, but increasingly so it is. And so, because increasingly people are paying attention to it, increasingly the features that are being asked for, from ADAS all the way to autonomy, are essentially software and AI. And so that needs to be built quickly. That is a task that is not unsurmountable at all, but it is something that has not traditionally been a core competency of the German auto market. And so, there's always, when there is a transformation, when there's something new, there's always new competencies that you need to build. And the German automakers, of course, have started a long time ago to start working on those. But there's probably still some way to go, and if you look at reviews, you look at how people, like on Reddit, Quora, people discuss their cars, then you'll see that there's still some work to be done, right? And that is essentially, that would be kind of the next thing to tackle.
Yeah, nice. And this just pointing out to this question that it flows, like you said. I love your quote. Your quote, the quote you brought to us about flowing, and this question by the students: software-defined vehicles, and then they acquiring the technical talent to write code, to build the organizational capability to manage software is precisely what you mentioned. And precisely, it's 2 p.m. Brazil time, so we need to stop over here, Christian. Really, I enjoyed much your talk, the conversation. Next, have another follow-up in next year, hopefully in person. Okay, take care.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the good discussion.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And next week, another great seminar will be there, will be here for us. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.